Yoda was very clearly apprehensive about the dark side cave on Dagobah, and finally, thanks to a new Star Wars comic, we know exactly what Yoda saw. Greetings, acolytes, and welcome back to the channel. One of the most famous moments from Luke Skywalker's training with Yoda is when he goes into the dark side cave, ultimately confronting his potential dark future and viewing that he could become just as his father now is. As we know, the cave was the reason that Yoda had decided to stay on Dagobah in the first place, as the cave's dark aura masked his presence in the light and shielded him from the eyes of the Emperor and Inquisitors. It was in this cave that Yoda had entered once before and seen the events of Order 66, but there was a time when the aged Jedi Master would enter the cave one final time. So what happened the day that Yoda decided to finally re-enter the dark side cave for himself and the future that lie within? Our story today comes from the final entry in the 10-issue canon Yoda comic series, where we encounter the former Grand Master and his massive guilt after the death of the Jedi Order itself, a destruction that he blames himself for entirely. It is now time for him to face the music and the guilt that he carries, his failures as Grand Master. So my friends, let's dive into this tale so that we can learn how the dark side cave on Dagobah nearly drove Yoda insane. To begin though, we have to establish what happened just prior. This all takes place on Dagobah, where Yoda is living out his final days leading into the events of Empire Strikes Back, where he will meet Luke. Day after day, Yoda wakes up and ruminates over his failures while going out in search of food and various other needs. Yoda struggles with his own self-doubt while also ignoring the path towards self-forgiveness. Throughout the issues, the ghost of Ben Kenobi constantly calls out to Yoda, but the Jedi Master ignores him, refusing to answer or even talk with Kenobi. All while this is occurring, we get flashbacks to various points in Yoda's life where he taught someone an important lesson, a lesson that Yoda never forgot. Messages of hope and seeing the beauty in life were now lost on the modern Grand Master, and the impossible has happened. Yoda has lost his way. In one flashback, we see Yoda helping out a primitive planet and teaching a young boy by the name of Bree an important lesson on always being willing to learn. In turn, Bree had given Yoda a little musical instrument called a tarati, an artifact that Yoda would keep with him all the days of his life, even taking it with him now in his exile on Dagobah. And this is where our final chapter of the story begins. We see Yoda and his friend Bree resting on the beach, with Yoda struggling to play the instrument. Bree offers to help Yoda, when suddenly the Death Star appears in the sky overhead. Yoda mentions that something is horrifically wrong, when suddenly Bree is replaced by a zombified version of the child of Anakin Skywalker, a representative of Yoda's greatest failure. Then, from behind the Grand Master, he hears a voice that is very familiar, the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon telling him why he didn't notice all the horrible things happening around him. Yoda wheels around with his lightsaber ignited, only to see a zombified Qui-Gon coming after him, blaming Yoda for everything. Qui-Gon's robes are tattered, his nails are sharp, and his skin is rotting away. His words are like daggers to the Grand Master. And to finish it all off, a gaping hole in his stomach where he had once been stabbed by Darth Maul. Yoda desperately attempts to calm the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn, explaining where he was coming from and his fear of a young Chosen One. Just then though, everything is vaporized by the Death Star, destroying everything that surrounded Yoda. In his hut on Dagobah, Yoda sharply wakes from this dream, a cold sweat running down his back. Sitting right next to him and asking if he had a nightmare was the ghost of Ben Kenobi. Tiredly, Yoda asks Obi-Wan if he was still there, and the ghost simply says that he's not going anywhere until the old master acknowledges what Kenobi has to say. Yoda instead decides to ignore the ghost again, ignoring his friend to go collect herbs. As Yoda drudges through the swamp, he finds himself at the gaping hole of the dark side nexus of the cave of Dagobah. He stands there for a moment, listening, as the voice of Ben Kenobi again appears, telling Yoda that he must enter the cave to face his fate. Of course, Yoda is apprehensive, but decides to enter the cave anyway after more coaxing from Kenobi, believing it is finally time to face the darkness. In his heart though, Yoda believes this is a waste of time and that it will prove nothing, only for him to be startled by a sudden flying creature making its way out of the cave. Yoda laments about how foolish and old he has become, only for another voice to respond. This time, not Obi-Wan, but Dooku. From the darkness, he says that he never thought of his master as foolish, at least not at first. "Why didn't you stop me, master, when you had the chance?" says Dooku from the shadows. "I tried to tell you. I tried to walk away. I even offered you my saber, but still, you would not listen. Once a Jedi, always a Jedi. Dooku then ignited his crimson blade, stepping forward, demanding to know why Yoda did not see what he was becoming, why he could not sense his apprentice had fallen so far. Yoda, in a rare moment, is filled with fear. He backs up, and he actually trips on something. Looking down, it is revealed that he has tripped over the corpse of an old friend, Master Yaddle. Putting two and two together, Yoda asked if Dooku was the one that killed her, and why he would do such a terrible thing. Dooku finally steps out of the shadows to reveal his horrifying visage, sharp teeth, black eyes, ragged stumps where his hands once were, his lightsaber levitating close by. Yoda and Dooku enter a brief duel, but behind him, a Jedi Master by the name of Keeve Trennis appears to the Grand Master. We then learn that Master Keeve was a Jedi Master and a member of the Lost 20 from the High Republic era, a Jedi who too berates the Grand Master as Yoda begs for her help to push away the specters. Instead, the Jedi Master force pushes Yoda into a pile of skulls, and yet another specter appears before him, Anakin Skywalker, half of his body lit with the fires of Mustafar. Anakin explains that the skulls were all people that Yoda had failed by his own blindness. From the pile of skulls, more of Yoda's zombified friends would emerge, people that he knew and loved. Bail Organa, Padme, Mace Windu, all of them clawing at Yoda and trying to drag him beneath the skulls of their very corpses, screaming to him that they looked to him for answers, for wisdom, that Yoda was supposed to be their teacher, but that he failed. Yoda desperately pled his case, telling him that he could not know, that there was no way for him to know that the Sith had returned the way that they did. But then, the most terrifying specter of all appears, a terrifying version of Lord Sidious standing over him, hands crackling, ignited with lightning. Sidious cackles, telling Yoda that he is the greatest of all of the Dark Lord's apprentices. He was blind and unaware, and now there was no going back. No undoing all that had been done. It's at this moment that Yoda is giving up hope, about to resign himself to all of his failures, to sink into the pile of skulls and embrace death. Just as the Grand Master resigns himself, he hears the faint music of the Tarati, and nearby is a warm fire with his friend Bree playing the small instrument alone. The young boy reminds Yoda of a lesson that he taught him. Hopeless. There is no such thing. You get it wrong, so you begin again. And it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make, because the greatest teacher, failure, is. Suddenly remembering all of the lessons that Yoda had taught everyone, he is renewed with a fresh vigor, freeing himself from the skulls nearby, casting the ghosts of his past away. As Yoda emerges from the cave with Obi-Wan still standing there waiting for him on the outside, the two Jedi have a brief exchange as Yoda pulls out the small Tarati instrument from his robes and sits down to begin to play it. He tells Obi-Wan that he has to go, and that Luke needs him. Confirming this, Ben says that Hoth is a dangerous world, but he asks if Yoda would be ready when Luke arrives. As the ghost of Obi-Wan vanishes to go to Luke on Hoth, Yoda says he is indeed ready to both teach and to learn from the young Skywalker. The comic ends with the line and Yoda happily playing his little instrument, waiting for Luke to arrive on the swamp world. Just as Yoda would say to Luke, Yoda brought with him everything that he feared. The specters were representative of Yoda's own guilt and his failure. Luke brought his weapons with him, and so the violent vision is what he got. But this time, Yoda brought with him guilt and grief. That is exactly what was thrown back at the Grand Master. He is filled with grief for being blind and not seeing all the happenings around him during the Clone Wars. The tragic part about this is Yoda's failures are not lost on him. Here the Force is the greatest teacher, revealing to Yoda even the fate of Master Yaddle. We also learned that Yoda blames himself for what happened to Anakin as well as Dooku. This is Yoda taking accountability for what he has done and deciding to move past it. In many ways, this is the rebirth of the Jedi Grand Master. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the dark side cave on Dagobah nearly driving Yoda insane? What are your thoughts on everything that Yoda saw and his extremely violent vision? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel today. May the Force be with you, and I will hopefully see you in another video.